Welcome back to Life's Chillin'. My name is Avital, and this week's Parsha is Parshat Bechukotai. Parshat Bechukotai is a really interesting Parsha. The Parsha begins with God telling the Jewish people the ways in which He'll reward us if we follow in His commandments and in His ways. And the Parsha then continues with the main really focus of the Parsha, which is on what's called the admonition, which is God telling the Jewish people what will befall them negatively if we don't follow in God's ways and in His commandments. And it's a lot of really gruesome and morbid stuff that increases in these increments. Like, if you don't follow my ways, then first this is going to happen to you. And if you still don't follow in my ways, then this is going to happen to you, and so on and so forth. It kind of increases in levels of intensity as we go further and further and further away from following God's commandments and in His ways. And it's a really difficult thing to understand and to grasp. I don't have a full sense of it. I think it's one of those things that maybe takes wisdom outside of the wisdom that human beings are able to fully comprehend. But I was able to glean this really beautiful idea from the admonition that I want to share with you. And it's something that we can learn about relationships, both between our relationship with God and our relationships with other people. So I'll read you those verses. So when God's talking about what will happen to the Jewish people in the admonition, He says, "But if you will not listen to me and will not perform all of these commandments, if you consider my decrees loathsome, and if you annul my covenant, then I will do the same to you." So that's the first part of God saying that if you decide that you're not going to have this relationship with me, then I'm not going to have this relationship with you. That's part one. The second verse I want to share is one that is actually repeated multiple times in this week's Parsha. And the idea is this verse I'm about to read you is sort of each time that the punishment increases for the Jewish people still not returning to God, the Torah says something like this: "If despite these you will not heed me, and you behave toward me with casualness, I will behave toward you with a fury of casualness." Which means that what God is saying here in both of these verses, where He first says, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to do the same to you. And if you behave toward me with casualness, I'm going to behave toward you with even more casualness. God is kind of telling us that what we put into our relationship with God is what we're going to get out of our relationship with God. If we decide we're going to be apathetic, God's going to be apathetic back towards us. And if we decide that we're really engaged and we're with it, then God's going to be really engaged back with us. God meets us at our level. That's why each of us gets to have the gift of having such a different relationship with God. God looks different to each of us. The relationship with God is one that we get to choose to have, and we get to choose what it looks like and dictate how much God's going to be involved in our lives and how little we're going to allow God to be involved in our lives. That is our choice, and God meets us at our place. And there's this idea of mirror neurons, if you've heard of it, which is that, as an example, if you're sitting here, I'm smiling at you, and I'm going to just keep smiling at you, you might just start smiling at me because you're going to mimic the behavior that I'm giving to you. And that idea is true both in our relationship with God, but it's also so true in our relationship with other people. What we put into our relationships with people, they're going to want to meet us at our level too. Let's take spouse, because it's just the easiest natural example of a relationship. If you're really excited to see your spouse when they get home, they're probably going to be really excited to see you when they get home from work. But if when your spouse gets home from work, you don't look up and you just keep doing what you're doing and you pay no attention to them, they're probably not going to pay any attention to you either. And that's the relationship that you also got to choose to build. You also got to choose how much you put into that relationship, and that's how much you get back out in your relationships. Sometimes it's hard to be the one to initiate. Sometimes it's hard to be the one who's excited and starts to act like, oh, now I'm going to be excited to see my spouse when they get home because I want them to be excited to see me. But that mimicking, those mirror neurons, those behaviors that we create for ourselves, it's very true that that is what we start to see reciprocated towards us. We get to make the changes, we get to make the choices of how involved and what kind of relationships we choose to create with God and with other people. And that is what that's what God is teaching us in this Parsha when He's saying that if you behave towards me with casualness, I'm going to behave towards you with casualness. God is saying, you're going to have to be the one to put in the effort. You're going to have to be the one to initiate, to take that first step, to show me what kind of relationship do you want to have with me? Because we as people, as human beings, we have free will. We have choice. God gives us the opportunity to have a relationship with him, but it's not a mandate. God doesn't say you have to have a relationship with me. There's no way that God could enforce that. It's very much the choice that we get to make as human beings with our free will to have a relationship with God. And so God is telling us to behave toward him the way that we want him to behave towards us. It's to treat your fellow like you want to be treated, to treat God the way you want God to respond back to you. And so I hope we can all take to heart this really valuable lesson that the Torah is teaching us in this week's Parsha. And I wish you all a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.